Hi everyone! Inspired by the classic French dessert, the citron crème tart, in this video we'll be making 2 lemon tart varieties using a single batch of lemon curd. The first is a sharp but refreshingly sweet fruit tart, and the second is a creamy and rich version topped with a torched Swiss-meringue. We'll be making a butter crust using the classic French sweet pie dough technique, which forms a delicate, flaky, and crispy crust. This buttery pastry really elevates the textural experience of this dessert when paired with the creamy smoothness of the curd. It's heaven in one bite. Onto a clean work surface, measure out 1 cup of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup almond flour, 1/2 cup powdered sugar, and a couple pinches of fine sea salt, and mix it to combine. Spread the flour mixture flat, then grate the frozen or very cold butter evenly over the surface, and then cut into the flour mixture using your bench scraper or any flat-edged kitchen utensils you have on hand until all the butter pieces are broken into the size of a rice grain. We want to bring the butter and flour together without melting or creaming the butter in order to preserve the flakiness of the pastry. To do this, grab a handful of the mixture and rub it between your palms to create small granules of butter and flour. Continue until the mixture is uniform, about the consistency of coarse sand or breadcrumbs. Now let's add our wet ingredients. Separate and add 2 large egg yolks and a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla paste to the flour mixture, and cut them into the dry mixture just until an even consistency is achieved and no large pieces remain. Then collect the pieces of the mixture, give it a squeeze, and bring it together into a rough dough ball. Add more flour if your dough is too wet and sticky to work with. I used only 1 cup of flour at the start because we have had very dry weather up here, and since we had rain all last week, which increased the moisture level of my dry ingredients, I had to add an additional 1/4 cup here. Your dough should be moist, but not as sticky. This by hand method up to this point can be easily replaced by a food processor or a stand mixer fitted with a paddle attachment. Add your flour, almond meal, powdered sugar, and salt in the bowl of your food processor and pulse a couple of times just to combine. Then add your very cold butter cut into 1/4-inch cubes and pulse until the large butter pieces are no longer visible and our mixture resembles coarse breadcrumbs. Now add your egg yolks along with the vanilla paste and blitz until a dough forms and clings to your blade, at which point your food processor will no longer blend. It will just spin. Turn the content out onto a clean work surface and give it a quick knead to bring it together. Next up, we will fraisier or fraisage our dough, which is a classic French technique used to make a sweet tart dough. Unlike a typical savory tart dough, which should be handled as little as possible, this technique smears pieces of the dough to stretch the individual butter granules, allowing them to cling to the flour. This not only reduces the shrinkage during the baking, but also creates a sturdy yet delicate crust that is both crispy and flaky. Lightly hold the end of the dough with the tips of your fingers and apply enough pressure to scrape a small section of the dough and smear it with the heel of your opposite hand, creating a thin layer of dough on your work surface, fanning it out in 3 to 4 sections. Continue to work your way inwards until all the dough has been stretched. Then, gather and turn 45 degrees and repeat the whole process about 7 to 10 times, or until you have a smooth and homogeneous dough ball. Form the dough into a disc and divide it into 6 equal pieces. We'll be able to make 8 10 centimeter round tart shells from these. Now, let's roll out our dough. Unlike the traditional way of resting and chilling your dough first, we're going to roll it out right now while the dough is malleable. Cut out 12 pieces of parchment paper large enough to roll these dough pieces into 16 centimeter circles. My pan size is 10 centimeters wide and 2 centimeters tall. For insurance, I've added 1 extra centimeter to each side. I'm cutting mine larger to reuse them for other baking needs. Shape the dough piece into a ball and place it between 2 pieces of parchment paper and roll out a 16 centimeter wide dough circle. Start by applying a gentle pressure at the center of your rolling pin and spread the dough outwards in all directions to form a rough circular shape. Then, turn the dough or rolling pin as you go and try and roll it as evenly as possible. Also, go around the edges and push the thicker parts of the dough to fill the gaps and complete the round dough piece. Now check to see if your dough sheet is large enough to fit the mold you're using and make the necessary adjustments. Just center the mold on the dough round, then lift both ends like so. The dough should come up a centimeter higher than the height of your mold. This should give you a dough sheet that will be approximately 2 millimeters in thickness, which is exactly what we're looking for this delicate tart. Go ahead and roll out the rest of the dough pieces and place them on a baking tray, then rest in the freezer for at least 30 minutes. These dough sheets at this point can be stored in an airtight container and kept in the freezer for up to 3 months until use. Once the dough has been thoroughly chilled, release the parchment paper and center the dough sheet, now looking more like thin cardstock, on the tart mold. Press the dough into the pan with both hands, cutting the excess on the edges as you apply a gentle pressure. Push down to the base of the pan with the tips of your fingers. The dough should just fit into the bottom surface of the pan, but for a few millimeters. Now use the remaining dough to line the vertical edges of the pan, working with a small piece at a time, overlapping at the joints by a few millimeters. The dough is very malleable and easy to work with to patch any imperfections without leaving a trace once baked. Just apply a very light pressure on the overlapped joints, and that should be sufficient to seal them together. With fluted tart pans, which I'm using here, follow the grooves to reflect the shape of your tart mold. Carefully press the dough fully into all contours of the pan with the size of your fingertips, patching any ribs or thinned out parts with the excess dough. Use a knife to cut the excess dough with a swift and confident motion as if you're slicing through water. Fluted pans require an extra labor of love. Continue to follow the contours and give it the shape it deserves. Finally, clean up the top edges using a rolling pin for a smoother and more compacted finish by placing your rolling pin at the center of the pan, then rolling it outward with some pressure to cut the excess dough. Return the softened dough sheets to the freezer to harden anytime during this process. Once all your 6 tart molds are lined, gather all the dough scraps to roll out 2 more dough sheets. Note that if you're using perforated tart rings, brush the inner sides thoroughly with some unsalted butter, especially through the holes. Also, avoid pressing in the dough too hard, which will block the holes, and you will have a hard time releasing the baked shells without breaking them, and all this effort will be lost. Finally, we're going to dock our dough. This process allows the steam to escape, which not only gives you a crispier crust, it also prevents the dough from puffing up and losing its shape while baking and saves you the extra step of weighing your dough down. Prick only the bottom part of the dough for the pans with a removable base and both bottom and sides for one-piece molds. Set the tart shells on a baking tray and chill thoroughly in the freezer for a minimum of 10 minutes. They should be very cold and hard to the touch before going to the hot oven. You can store these bake-ready tart shells in an airtight container in the freezer for up to 3 months until use. Now, let's make the lemon curd while our dough sheets are resting in the freezer. By the way, you can use this exact same recipe to make lime meringue tarts by replacing the lemons with limes. First, wash your lemons thoroughly. If your lemons aren't organic, soak them in a vinegar water solution at a 1:10 ratio, that is, 1 part vinegar to 10 parts water, for a minimum 20 minutes to eliminate any harmful chemical residues on the skin, which we'll be using for this recipe. After drying them completely on a kitchen towel, zest as many lemons as you will be juicing, either using a zester like this, or a fine cheese grater, or even a vegetable peeler. It takes about 6 lemons for the types of lemons we get up here to make the 1 cup juice needed for this recipe, but I usually have a few extra just in case they are not as juicy. It's always easier to zest the lemons whilst they're still intact. Be sure to stop grating past the yellowish part of the skin. The white part of the skin is tasteless and possibly add bitterness to your curd, which we want to avoid. Now, to juice our lemons. I personally find this type of squeezer works best, and if you have something like this, try placing the cut side of the lemon half facing down, like so. I've discovered that it helps you squeeze the lemons far more effectively than the conventional method of following the contours of the squeezer. As you can see, the juices tend to squirt out of the sides of the device onto your counter. Once we have our zest and lemon juice, we can prepare other ingredients for the curd. We're going to need 6 large eggs and 6 large yolks for this recipe. Separate 6 eggs carefully so as not to leave any trace of the broken yolks, reserving the whites for our Swiss-meringue to be whipped later. Meringues don't like fat, and any small amount of egg yolk will affect the volume of the whipped meringue. Next, crack 6 whole eggs into the yolks and combine with the lemon juice and the zest in a medium-sized saucepan along with 1 1/4 cups of granulated white sugar and whisk well. We want the mixture to be homogeneous without any lumps of visible egg whites or yolks, which may cook separately and end up giving us a curd of lesser quality. Set the pan on a medium-high heat and bring it to a boil whilst stirring continuously, scraping the bottom and the sides of the pan thoroughly to avoid burning the curd. You can switch to a spatula once it starts to thicken, which will make it easier to scrape down the sides and the bottom of the pan. However, you can also continue with the French whisk as I am here. We're going to cook this mixture until it's thick and smooth. When large fat bubbles begin to emerge from the center of the pan or at the first boil, continue to stir and boil additional 5 to 7 seconds before removing the pan from the heat. This added cooking time will ensure us to get rid of any fishiness of undercooked eggs. Finally, strain the curd through a fine sieve to eliminate all the solid lumps until we are left with a smooth and silky bowl of lemon curd. Place a large sheet of cling wrap over the curd and press it tightly to the surface, leaving no areas that are exposed to air so as to prevent the skin forming on the curd. Then, set the bowl in the freezer or over an ice bath to cool completely. Next, we're going to blind bake our tart crusts. Blind baking simply means that tart crusts are pre-baked without any filling. Place the well-chilled tart shells in the middle rack of your preheated oven and bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 177 degrees Celsius for about 18 to 20 minutes, or until they are a deep golden color and the edges have begun to darken slightly. Once removed from the oven, let them cool on the tray for 5 minutes. Then release them from the molds while they're still warm. To release them from the solid or perforated ring molds, gently press the inner sides of the crust with a slight twist, then invert them onto your hand like so. As for the false-bottomed molds, push the removable piece upwards, then gently poke the edges with the tip of a sharp knife and slide it across until it releases. Finally, melt 2 tablespoons of butter and brush the inner sides of the shells thoroughly. This will act as a moisture barrier that will keep these delicate crusts from turning soggy once filled with the curd. After an hour of chilling in the freezer, our lemon curd should look like this, still quite soft and malleable. It'll pair beautifully with a fruit or meringue topping. But today we're going to divide this batch of curd into 2 equal portions to make 2 very distinct types of lemon tarts. Using 1 portion just as is, we'll make 3 lemon fruit tarts. With the other half, we will incorporate butter and make 4 lemon meringue tarts. While the curd in its current state is refreshingly tangy and lemony, when butter is added, the curd becomes richer and incredibly luscious. Whisk in 4.5 tablespoons of unsalted butter at room temperature cut into small cubes, adding a few pieces at a time until all the butter has incorporated fully before the next portion is added. A blender or an electric hand mixer makes easy work of this, but the process can be easily done manually with a balloon whisk as long as the resulting product looks like this, smooth and silky. Pipe or spoon the curd into your well-prepared tart shells. For the non-butter version, fill each one 2/3 full, leaving enough room for any spillage from the weight of the fruits. Then simply dust with some icing sugar and enjoy. With the butter-inclusive version reserved for our lemon meringue tarts, however, you can fill them flush with the rim for the optics of a cleaner cross-sectional view. Set them in the freezer for a minimum of 2 hours, but preferably overnight. Although these curd-filled tarts are best to be garnished and eaten on the same day they're made, they'll stay just as fresh stored in the freezer in an airtight container for up to 3 months until use. When ready, just take them out of the freezer and garnish them with some fresh berries or freshly whipped meringue. Or you can turn them into lemon brulee tarts simply by sprinkling a generous amount of powdered sugar on top, then torching the sugar to caramelize. My personal favorite fruit topping for this butter-free curd is blueberries, bar none. However, other fruits such as strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, seedless green grapes, mangoes, pineapples, or passion fruits offer significant flavor dimensions, giving you different enjoyment experiences for these tarts. To finish them off, be generous with your confectioner's sugar. And there we have it. Our lemon fruit tarts are now ready to be enjoyed. Next, we're going to whip up some meringue to top our butter-incorporated tarts. Although all meringues, namely French, Italian, and Swiss, are made of the same 2 key ingredients, egg whites and sugar, their varying techniques produce meringues of different structures and densities used for different applications. For instance, this boiling sugar syrup is whipped into a pre-whipped egg whites to make an Italian meringue that's known for its stability, thus popular for topping tarts as such. But we're going to make a Swiss meringue today that will be as stable and ethereal as the Italian, yet using only 2 easy and safe steps. Let's begin. First, Place 100 grams of egg whites and 200 grams of granulated white sugar in a heat-proof mixing bowl and give it a little stir just to combine. I'm using the bowl of my stand mixer and the whisk attachment here. Then, set the mixture over a pan of gently simmering water, making sure that the bottom of the mixing bowl does not touch the water in the pan. This technique of double boiling allows for our sugar and egg whites mixture to cook using only the steam generated from the simmering water. Stir continuously and cook the mixture until it reaches 73 degrees Celsius or 163 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, we'll get the most optimal meringue base to create the most stable meringue without sacrificing its pillowy properties. An undercooked egg mixture will result in a runny and unstable meringue. However, overcooking it will give us a denser meringue that may be suitable as a cake frosting but will not suit our delicate tart. If you don't have a thermometer at hand, you can cook your mixture just until it is absent of any undissolved sugar granules. You can determine this by rubbing the mixture between your fingers and feeling for any grains of sugar. When cooked, your mixture should feel completely smooth without any grittiness. Once all the sugar has dissolved, cook the mixture for 90 seconds longer. At this point, it should be at the correct temperature. Once our mixture is ready, we're going to remove it from the heat and immediately start the whipping process on the highest speed setting of your electric mixer or manually using balloon whisk. Your mixing bowl should be quite hot to the touch at this point. We'll be whipping this very runny and opaque mixture until our mixing bowl has completely cooled down to room temperature. As our meringue is whipping away vigorously, prepare the tools you'll be using to top your tarts. While you can always brulee the meringue by setting the tarts directly under a broiler for a couple of seconds at a time, using a kitchen torch will most certainly give you better control of the caramelization process. Attach your torch head securely on the butane capsule and be sure to test it out thoroughly before moving to your tarts. Also, have ready a spatula and the piping bag fitted with a tip of your choice set over a cup if using. I'm using a 1.5 centimeters wide plain piping tip today. My touch test says our Swiss-meringue is now ready, which means my mixing bowl no longer feels of any warmth to the touch and has cooled down to a comfortable room temperature. The resulting product should look like this: a gloriously lustrous white meringue that holds a firm peak. This meringue will maintain its shape and not droop or deform. Be mindful that an underwhipped meringue will lack stability, but overwhipping a meringue will cause it to clump up into a dry mess, rendering it useless. Now, for the most fun part of this recipe. To pipe the meringue, hold your piping bag vertically over the tart like so, and squeeze the meringue to build some height, then drag the tip upwards to finish it off and get these droopy tips, which will add dramatic effects to our tarts. You can always forego this process by simply scooping the meringue directly onto the tart and smearing the surface with a spatula or an offset palette knife. Depending on the look you're going for, you can create some interesting patterns this way. After all, you are the artist, so try and have some fun with it. Here we have it, simple yet pleasing to the eyes. But a lemon meringue tart isn't complete until the meringue has been torched and given a smoky flavor. The caramelization process also tones down the overt sweetness of meringue in its natural state. I am constantly moving my tray and the torch head, applying as little heat as possible at a time. This allows me to have a better control of the caramelization process. You can always go over and deepen the color, however, you cannot undo a burnt meringue, so take your time. And don't worry about the meringue tips catching on fire because they will go out on their own within a second or two. But if you want less dramatic effects, by all means blow them out as it happens. I'm also running my torch lightly over the crust to enhance the nuttiness while drying up any moisture it may have collected from the air. While some may like a light and golden finish with only a small area torched, I personally prefer a darker finish to my meringue. When caramelized all over, you get a deeper smokiness to the overall taste. Voila! Our lemon meringue tarts are finally ready. Just a little reminder, while these freshly whipped and bruleed tarts are best enjoyed straight away, both the curd and meringue freeze amazingly well and can be stored in the freezer for up to 3 months without sacrificing their integrity. So set aside some for today's consumption and transfer the rest to an airtight container and stash them away for future enjoyment. In fact, the frozen tarts are very tasty right out of the freezer, especially on a hot day. This also allows for you to experience the altering textures and flavors at various stages of defrosting. Now for our long-awaited moment. Just look at this exquisitely velvety and creamy lusciousness this tart offers. The curd has softened, and the meringue is so pillowy and light with a gorgeous hint of smokiness. 1 week later, just out of the freezer, I wanted to show you how we can all enjoy the freezer-stored tarts at a later time. Look at the clean edges on this piece. This would be a perfect way to present your tarts on a dessert plate. You can always make the cross sections look a lot smoother by dipping your knife in some warm water before slicing it. It's like biting into a short crust-coated ice cream bar. After a pleasantly cold mouthful, you will feel the velvety texture of the solidified curd dissolving into a refreshingly lemony and creamy custard. So divine. Another amazing thing about this freezer-stored tart is that the crust remains crispy and flaky, and the meringue still perfectly in its original form, as though we've just whipped it and assembled it. And look at this beautifully defrosted wedge, 40 minutes at room temperature. The curd has softened significantly to a lovely silky and smooth consistency of another dimension. And listen to the sound of the crispness of the crumbs bouncing off the board. It is so silky and smooth, and the flavors have elevated to another level. Absolutely delicious. This is a lemon meringue tart at its best. Here are the lemon fruit tarts assembled just minutes ago. The non-buttered curd is refreshingly tangy and lemony, and it goes so well with my favorite topping, a mound of very, very firm blueberries. The moment of truth. Wow. It's delicious. This has got to be my all-time dessert, bar none. Thank you for watching.